All right, let's jump right in with today's deep dive. And we're going way back in time for this one, back to the Bronze Age.
Ooh, sounds intriguing.
It is. We're going to be exploring this scientific article about a discovery in the Xiaohe Cemetery, which is in Xinjiang, China.
Okay.
And it's a 3,500-year-old cheese.
Wow, 3,500 years. That's amazing.
Yeah, and the craziest part is that scientists were able to get DNA from it.
That's incredible. I mean, how was that even possible after all that time?
I know, right? And this DNA, it's not just telling us what these people were eating, but it's giving us insights into how humans and microbes have been evolving together for, like, millennia.
Wow, so it's like a snapshot of the past, but in cheese form.
Exactly. So first off, when I think of ancient cheese, I don't know why, but I just assume it's, cow's milk.
Yeah, that's what I would think too.
But the analysis showed that this cheese, it was actually made using both cow and goat's milk.
Really? A blend? That's interesting. Why do you think they would do that?
Well, from the article, it looks like the Xiaohe people, based on their genetics, they were probably lactose intolerant.
Ah, that makes sense. So blending the milk and then turning it into cheese, especially with the whole fermentation thing, that would help to break down the lactose.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Making it easier to digest.
So smart. It's like they were way ahead of their time when it comes to, like, food science and stuff.
I know. It's pretty impressive, but it makes you wonder about the milk itself, especially the goat's milk.
Yeah, where did it even come from? Were there goats in that region back then?
Well, the DNA analysis, this is where it gets really cool. The goat DNA in the cheese.
Yeah.
It's actually similar to goats that were found across Europe and Central Asia during that same time period.
Wait, so are we talking about goats traveling like thousands of miles from Europe to China?
It seems that way.
Yeah.
Back then, the Eurasian steppes, they were like this massive open route connecting east and west.
Like a superhighway for goats.
Exactly. So there could have been a lot of cultural exchange happening between the Jiao people and these populations that were, like, super far away.
Yeah, maybe through trade or migration. Who knows?
Yeah. It's really mind-blowing to think about. And then the fact that we can even, get this information from DNA that's this old, DNA degrades over time, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the amazing thing about this discovery is that the cheese's microbiome, that's the community of all the microbes in it, it's incredibly well preserved.
You mean like the bacteria and stuff?
Yeah, exactly. They found actual DNA from bacteria and fungi, and get this, the same types that are found in kefir today.
Kefir. Now that's throwing me for a loop.
Right. So for anyone who doesn't know, kefir is that it's that fermented milk drink, kind of tangy.
Yeah, I've had it before. It's got that, like, slightly fizzy thing going on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's made using these things called kefir grains.
Kefir grains. I've never heard of those. What are they?
So they're not actually grains like wheat or rice. Think of them more like these little communities of bacteria and yeast.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they all live together, in this like symbiotic relationship, and they're super important for making kefir.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection here. So these kefir grains are kind of like the secret ingredient for kefir.
Exactly, because they contain all the microbes that do the fermenting, transforming the milk into that like tangy, bubbly drink.
Okay. And this cheese, it was a kefir cheese.
Yes, made using those kefir grains. Pretty cool, right?
So these little kefir grains, they're like holding the key to unlocking the secrets of this ancient cheese's microbiome. And it tells us so much about history.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and not just the past, but the evolution of kefir itself. I always thought it came from, like, the Caucasus region and then spread to Europe.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people think.
But this Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens, it's a key bacteria in kefir, and its DNA from the cheese, it's suggesting a totally different path.
Hold on, are you saying there might be another origin for kefir?
That's what it looks like. The DNA suggests that maybe kefir also spread from, like, Xinjiang to inland East Asia, places like Tibet.
So we could be looking at two separate origins for kefir, or at least two distinct branches of its history.
It completely changes how we think about how food and culture were moving around in the ancient world.
It's incredible. It's like this cheese is rewriting history right before our eyes.
Yeah.
And that's just the beginning.
I know. There's so much more to unpack here. I can't wait to get into, like, the whole microbial evolution part of this.
Well, buckle up, because in part 2, we're going to delve into the world of microbes and how this cheese is showing us just how much humans have shaped the evolution of the tiny organisms we eat.
That's next time on our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We're picking up where we left off, talking about this 3,500-year-old cheese and what it can tell us about the evolution of microbes.
Last time we were talking about how this cheese might actually rewrite the history of kefir, which is already pretty mind-blowing.
It is pretty amazing.
But I'm really curious to learn more about this microbial evolution thing. Like, how have these microbes actually changed over time? What can we see in the cheese?
Well, this cheese, it's giving us a glimpse into how adaptable these microbes really are.
Okay.
One of the ways that bacteria, like the Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens we talked about, they evolve through something called horizontal gene transfer.
Horizontal gene transfer. That sounds kind of complicated.
It's not as complex as it sounds.
Okay, good.
Basically, bacteria, they can swap genes with each other, kind of like trading cards.
So they're just sharing genes.
Yeah, and this lets them pick up new traits and abilities,
Interesting.
and sometimes even from totally different species.
Wow, so it's like a shortcut for evolution.
Exactly.
And this cheese, it has evidence of this happening.
It does. When scientists looked at the DNA of the ancient Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens from the cheese and compared it to modern-day strains, they found signs of genes that were likely acquired through horizontal gene transfer.
Okay, so what kind of genes are we talking about here?
Well, some of them are pretty interesting.
Like what?
For example, they found genes for antibiotic resistance in the ancient Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens.
Antibiotic resistance. But didn't we just start using antibiotics like relatively recently?
That's true, but a lot of microbes, they naturally produce antibiotic-like substances to compete with each other.
Ah, so it's like a microbial arms race, even back then.
Exactly. And these antibiotic resistance genes would help the Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens to survive in this, competitive environment.
Wow, that's amazing. So what other kinds of genes did they find?
They also found genes that give protection against things called phages.
Phages. Now, what are those?
They're basically viruses that infect bacteria,
Oh, okay.
and they're everywhere. So having those genes would have been pretty important for survival.
So even back then, these bacteria were like defending themselves against these tiny viruses.
It's pretty amazing what's happening at such a microscopic level, isn't it?
It really is. And I guess it makes sense, like survival of the fittest, even for microbes.
Right. And here's another thing that's really interesting.
Lay on me.
The ancient Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens, it also picked up genes that might have made it easier for humans to digest.
Hold on. Are you saying that these bacteria were actually evolving in a way that helped us?
It's a possibility. And if it's true, it would mean that, by making and eating kefir, humans were kind of accidentally shaping the evolution of these microbes.
Wow. That's incredible.
We were selecting for the traits that were beneficial to us without even knowing it.
It's like a really long-term symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of coevolution.
Mind-blowing. Okay, so we've got ancient cheese revealing microbial warfare, antibiotic resistance, and even the evolution of, gut health.
It's pretty incredible, right?
This is seriously making me think about all the other fermented foods out there, like kimchi and sourdough bread.
Oh, yeah.
They must all have their own microbiomes and histories to tell, right?
Absolutely. And each one of them has likely co-evolved with humans over centuries, shaping both the food and us.
Wow, that's crazy to think about.
There's actually one more really cool thing about this cheese discovery that I haven't mentioned yet.
Okay, what is it?
It's the resilience of this cheese's microbiome.
Resilience.
Yeah, not only was the DNA really well preserved, but the cheese itself, it was amazingly resistant to contamination from environmental microbes.
So even though it was buried for thousands of years, the original microbes in the cheese basically stayed intact?
Pretty much. You'd expect to find DNA from all sorts of bacteria and fungi from the soil, but the cheese's microbiome, it stayed remarkably pure.
So how did they manage to stay so resilient for all those years?
Oh, remember those kefir grains we talked about?
Yeah, those little microbial communities.
Right. So scientists think that the relationship between the bacteria and yeast in those grains created this protected environment that other microbes couldn't really get into.
So those kefir grains, they were like guardians of the cheese's microbiome.
Exactly. Protecting it from outside invaders for thousands of years.
That's amazing. So it wasn't just about fermenting the milk, it was also about preserving this unique microbial balance.
It really shows how complex and resilient these microbial communities can be. And it also suggests that maybe the Gel people, they understood how to control these microbial processes to keep their food safe.
Wow, I'm starting to see food in a whole new light. It's not just about what we eat, but also about the invisible world of microbes that comes with it.
And those microbes, they've been shaped by generations before us, and they're still being influenced by the choices we make today.
That's a powerful thought.
It is. And in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore what this means for the future of food and our relationship with these microbes. So stay tuned.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this incredible 3,500-year-old cheese coccinelle. It's been quite the journey.
It really has. We've gone from figuring out what's in it and where it came from to delving into this whole world of microbes.
I know, and their resilience. It's amazing how those little guys survived for so long.
Yeah, and as we wrap up here, I think it's important to think about what this all means for us today.
Okay, so we're shifting gears from the past to the present, and even looking ahead, what can this ancient cheese teach us about, like the choices we're making now?
Well, I think it's a really powerful reminder that we're connected to these microbial worlds way more than we realize.
Yeah, I'm definitely starting to see that.
And our actions, they have this ripple effect.
Like, you mean even something as simple as what we eat can affect how microbes evolve?
Exactly. Remember we talked about how humans might have shaped the Lactobacillus kefiranofaciens in kefir just by drinking it?
Yeah, that was pretty wild.
Well,
I
the
know.
Xiaohe people, by making this kefir cheese, they were also influencing the microbes involved.
So they were kind of like accidentally shaping the cheese's microbiome.
Exactly. Without even knowing it, they were fostering certain bacteria and yeasts.
It's amazing to think about, but our food system today, it's so different from what it was back then, right?
That's true. But the basic idea is still the same. We're still interacting with and influencing microbes through our food.
So even though we're not making ancient cheese in tombs anymore, the choices we make about food still matter.
They really do think about the rise of processed foods and how much we use antibiotics.
Okay. Yeah.
Those things, they have the potential to mess with these microbial ecosystems.
And that could lead to things like antibiotic resistance, right?
Exactly, which is a huge problem.
So this ancient cheese, it's not just a cool artifact, it's like a warning sign.
In a way, yeah, it's telling us to be mindful of the impact our choices have on these microbes.
I mean, we share the planet with them, right?
We do.
Yeah.
And this brings up a really big question. Knowing what we know now, how can we use our understanding of microbes to create a better future?
That's a great question. I mean, maybe there are things we can learn from, like traditional ways of making food, like this kefir cheese.
Yeah. Maybe those practices can teach us how to have a more balanced relationship with the microbes all around us.
I like that idea. This whole deep dive has really changed how I see the world. Like, I never thought I'd be thinking so much about the tiny organisms in my food.
It's pretty fascinating stuff, right?
It is. And I have a feeling I'm going to be looking at cheese a little differently from now on.
I think we all will. It's amazing what we can learn from a little bit of ancient cheese.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time and into the incredible world of microbes. And
Until next time, happy fermenting.